It's interesting that Jean Pascal has been with Schneider for about 26 years now, and I suspect very few of those years, despite you being French and Schneider Electric being a French company, very few of those years were you living in France. Truly a global company as evidenced by your mobility. We're going to open it up for questions now. I'm looking, Cherry, by the way, are we going to 11 o'clock or 11:05? Oh, an extra 5 minutes. Thank you. Executive decision. So we welcome questions. We'll see if anything comes in writing. We have some TDC staff working the room to be able to, you can hand them your written questions. But one of the, as I've said this before in previous years, one of the privileges and power of being the moderator is I get to ask the first question. And let's go back to our first speaker, John Rice, if I may. And you talked about developing your more Chinese staff, mainland Chinese staff that will grow with the company. But I've also seen you say in previous interviews over the years that you like the term rising markets instead of emerging markets. It's more all-encompassing and reflects different country situations. But that one of the mistakes a company can make in a rising market is not putting a sufficiently big enough executive in that country. Thank you. And it's by placing a big executive in a country, that's how you're going to drive growth within that region. Can you comment on that strategy with General Electric?
Sure, and I guess there are 2 points I'd make. They were bigger people, so that our emphasis, quite frankly, is not as much on what we do here in Hong Kong for our global operations, but it's how we're putting bigger decision makers closer to our markets and the point of contact. And the 2 changes that go with that are we've taken people from our operating businesses and put them in these roles. So this is less and less kind of a corporate staff type job, and much more the people we want in these roles have an operating DNA. They know what it's like to make investments, to make orders, to make commitments, and to deliver for customers and make decisions. And then the second thing we did was support these people with bigger functional resources, so HR, legal, finance, because if you're in a company like ours, and I suspect in Schneider and in a lot of places, if you just put a big executive in, but you have all your senior HR people back at headquarters, it's going to be very hard for them to make the kind of things happen that need to happen. So for what was for us a pretty big move at the time, we put bigger people into these key roles in countries and regions. We also put bigger functional leaders in with all of them.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you, John. I have a question here from Thailand, and it's directed to Andrew in particular, but it's also welcoming comments from the other 2. Andrew, you have made a convincing case for using Hong Kong as a launchpad into China, but how much is Shanghai trying to attract companies on its own without using Hong Kong? And as part of that question, how well does Hong Kong collaborate with Shanghai today about launching businesses and regulatory and other issues? Andrew first.
It's good to know I get the easy question. Just adding on to John's point, the decision to have our head of HR, a head of people, we thought was absolutely paramount, because mobility is one of the biggest challenges in any organization, and we felt that made a big difference. So now I've had time to think of the answer to the question on Shanghai. There's always this debate, Hong Kong versus Shanghai, Hong Kong versus Singapore. I think the view we all have is there's room for everybody. In terms of government collaboration, there's quite a lot of there's a lot more collaboration between Hong Kong and Shanghai behind the scenes than perhaps is readily apparent, particularly on the reciprocal arrangements between the 2 stock exchanges. There's quite a lot on the capital markets going on behind the scenes. We've seen waves. 15 years ago, most regional headquarters would be in Hong Kong. Then there was a trend whereby regional headquarters wouldn't be in Hong Kong but would be in Shanghai. And then we saw another trend where our friends in Singapore offered quite a lot of incentives and concessions if you go to Singapore. We saw a move of headquarters to Singapore. But every time there's been that move, we've always seen a sort of almost a natural default back to Hong Kong. And I'm not just saying that obviously because I'm based here. The natural default is based on two things. I think it's based on, versus Singapore, it's based on the proximity to the biggest market in Asia. And however good the operations are in Singapore, however good the incentives are, there's no substitute for being right next door to the biggest market. And the second one is actually the talent pool and professional base here and the rule of law, which still tends to be seen as an advantage compared to Shanghai. And another angle I just put in, there's been a lot of double tax treaties floating around. For double tax treaty, what that really means is knowledge sharing treaties. So there's not much private anymore in the world. But one of the offshoots of this has been that it's now become, if you're entering into China, it's now down to basically Singapore or Hong Kong as the holding company route through which you go. And that's taken away a lot of these more obscure offshore jurisdictions, which has actually made Hong Kong more attractive again. So I think it goes in waves, and the thing which saves Hong Kong every time is the professionalism of everybody here. What I talked about, the rule of law, the tax base, etc. I think, and the access to talent. Nearly every major multinational we know in China would admit they've got a great challenge in succession planning, getting the HR right. And still, perhaps Hong Kong has an advantage on that.
JP, John, comments on Shanghai and the role with Hong Kong?
Well, I don't see it as a war, as a choice between the two. We are present, obviously, in all regions. And it's not only when you speak about China, when you are in industry, it's not only about Shanghai. It's about the north. It's about now the hinterland quite a lot. So I see those places are very complementary. We don't do the same things in the same cities, and we try to balance our presence between the different positions. It's not exactly China in itself as a country is a continent. So clearly in China we do more China for China. When you go to Hong Kong, clearly the role is more global.
You know, Barry, in a way, I think there's almost too much preoccupation over the specific job. You know, if you're putting manufacturing jobs in a place, the bigger question is where's the supply chain? And that can be a multiplier of 4 or 5 or 6x the specific manufacturing job. And the same thing with respect to research and development and engineering. And you know, if you're going to put 100 people in a center somewhere to do research, the question isn't why isn't it 150 or 175 or 200, but how are those jobs plugged into your global innovation framework? Because that's going to be a multiplier. I mean, over 5 years, if you have the right people and they're plugged into that right framework, you probably will end up with 200 or 300 people at that center. And, you know, if you don't find the right people and they're not plugged in the way they ought to be, you'll end up with no more than you started with.
Yeah, thank you. JP, I have to apologize. Although I come from a country where French is one of our official languages, I hope when I say Schneider Electric instead of saying Schneider, that doesn't grate on your ears as an English pronunciation. Sorry about that. You just mentioned manufacturing costs and so forth, John. This ties into a question here that we've it's interesting. It comes from the Fujian province in China, one of our delegates. And this is about business costs. And with labor rising in China, labor costs rising in China, we're seeing the manufacturing base move out of China to some degree to lower cost manufacturing jurisdictions like Vietnam and the Philippines, amongst others in Asia. How do you see this as an issue in this business? Are you having to quickly adapt to those changing trends with labor costs and movement of manufacturing? John, would you like to go first?
Well, yeah, Jean-Pascal has a lot of experience here. I would just say that labor cost is only one factor that you consider when you invest somewhere. And if it's the only reason you go someplace, then at some point you're probably going to end up being wrong because labor costs change over time. And the example of China in comparison to Vietnam is a good example, right? I mean, in the world, the low-cost labor places in the world 60 years ago were Japan and Korea and Hong Kong and Singapore, and none of them are very low cost today. So I think you have to focus on all of the attributes and accept the fact that over time labor costs are going to change and they're probably going to go up. So you got to have other reasons for being places.
If I may complement, one of the key assets of China is the incredible network of suppliers also. So we live in an ecosystem where we rely a lot on suppliers to make our products, 70-80% of our products. And in China, you've got this incredible advantage of having a mature, competitive network of suppliers. Add to that infrastructure. The question is coming from Fujian, for instance. We have factories in Xiamen. We are very happy of them. But the infrastructure, when you see the investment, the high-speed trains, the ports which have been established in China, it has changed the geography on the map. Now you can produce inside China and bring your products outside of China very easily, which was not the case recently or a few years ago from Chongqing, from Wuhan, or from Chengdu. So it's things are moving. And then automation, which is one of our business, is helping China to become very productive. There is a cost of labor, then there is a productivity on the education of the workers. Maybe one of the issues we've had on the issue.
Andrew, this question I think relates well to KPMG too. I imagine in your business you've looked at centralizing some of your back office functions in lower cost jurisdictions, including India, China or other places. Is this a big impact for you?
One of the big challenges we've always had, Barry, is getting the market to understand that the cost differential between Hong Kong and China and then between London and New York in professional services isn't so great as people would imagine. It's always been a big challenge. If you're a manager at KPMG in a second-tier city in China, you're earning the same as a manager in Hong Kong. That's the way it is. We have a big shared service center in India. We're starting to use it out of Hong Kong and China quite a lot, but we're about to announce the opening of a big shared service center in China as well. Mm-hmm. And it's all about, on the back office, getting those costs out and getting a consolidation of the effort when you're trying to manage many different locations. But just in a similar vein, we've seen so many clients with this pressure on costs in China. And I agree very much with John's analysis. Our client base are always articulating that it's much more than just the cost story, which resonates about the presence in China.
Why, for your new center you just mentioned in China, what were the factors in choosing China over the more traditional shared service areas such as India in this decision for you?
We've actually got a very practical problem, I suppose that's the right word, where we really feel if it's data relating to Chinese companies, it's not appropriate to work on it and store it outside China. There's some quite well documented matters in the media these days about working papers, where they should be, etc. And we just think the right thing to do is to have the shared service center in China.
That's interesting. I have another written question that comes from Edmonton in Canada. And it's directed to you, Andrew. And personally, I have seen KPMG do some excellent publications on world advantages and, taxation and listings on various jurisdictions and comparing the jurisdictions. And this question is about your competitive alternatives reports. How well can you speak on some of the world reports that KPMG has done? And this one is referencing particularly ranking cities around the world as business locations. Any comments on that, Andrew? It's a very general question, I know.
Is that a KPMG report on ranking cities?
Yes.
I thought I knew every single report, but I'm not familiar with that one. Have you got a bit more detail about it?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. Comment. Fair enough.
I assume the question is because perhaps Hong Kong wasn't top of the ranking. Edmonton was higher.
Edmonton was probably highest in this
so
one.
I apologize. I can get back to the individual.
Yeah. We'll open it up to the floor now. Anyone would like to ask a question by standing up, and we can get you a microphone?
Yes, I'm the one that raised a question about this comparative alternatives. I think it was about 2001. KPMG did an exercise on G7 countries ranking 86 cities in those G7 countries. And the exercise was for the purpose of saying in which location, in which city, would it be most cost effective to locate your new business in. And at that time, I think the top 6 cities were in Canada. And the top city was, in fact, Edmonton.
Andrew got that right.
Yes. And so I'm interested in knowing, I understand that KPMG has been continuing with that exercise every year. But the methodology has changed. And I'd like to see what is up to date on that. I think right now the cities are grouped into sectors or something. But I lost track on that, and I was very, very interested in knowing what is it up to. Of course, now we're no longer talking about G7 countries. We're talking about G8 or maybe G9 or G22. So KPMG must have got a new methodology of ranking this, and I'm most interested. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew?
My understanding is that I'm not hugely familiar with this. With my real estate and infrastructure hat on, we've actually gone the other way of going through the top 100 infrastructure projects, the top cities in terms of their development. But in terms of ranking, I'm sorry, I don't have that data. I don't think we're still doing it, actually.
Fair enough, thank you. One more question from the floor, and then we'll wrap it up. Yeah.
Hi. Hello, can you hear me? Hi, I'm Paul Stinson currently living in Thailand, from Canada originally. I was very interested in the comment about, from JP about smart cities and all of the work that Schneider's doing. Can you just give us a quick summary? I know you had a slide up there and you mentioned Victor Loh and the collaboration you've had with him. Has that been mostly in China, in Shanghai? I know that he's involved with a smart city initiative there, and I just wonder if you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, the collaboration we had with Victor was really on home automation, on design of products. You know, he's really a mentor of design, and we share that passion for product design. So we have worked and we keep working with him on this topic. And we created a big franchise. It is what is called on home automation for the whole of Asia. Actually, our products are leading in the whole region. So that's one. On the smart city part, today we are serving 200 cities in the world. Half of them are in North America. North America has always been traditionally more advanced with the IT, in bringing IT advantages into infrastructure. But we are serving 40 cities, mainly in Asia, and 40 others in Europe. And the functionalities that you are speaking here is all about energy efficiency. We think that in a city like Hong Kong, like in any other city today, before thinking about new power plants, we should be having the target to save 20% of energy, which would reduce the pollution by the same factor, by the way. But it's also managing water networks. Most of the water networks have huge leakages. You can reduce that by 15%. Traffic jam and traffic delays, you can reduce the time by 20% again. Criminality, thanks to a good combination of videos that can serve also managing the traffic, can be reduced by 20%. It's very exciting. A lot of new jobs which are accessible, by the way, for youngsters to go into technology and innovation. And we would like to contribute in Hong Kong because it's a perfect bench. It's already a great city, but it's a perfect bench to make it a flagship city for the rest of Asia.
We've heard from 3 very old businesses that are also very new businesses in relevant business. 3 global organizations, all 3 with headquarters in Hong Kong, and 3 individuals at the top of the game. This has been fascinating. Thank you very much.